Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hi, everyone. Today we are talking about 5G, and who better to bring on than Eros Spadato. Eros is the Executive Vice President of Technology, Strategy, and Business Transformation at TELUS. Eros, welcome. It's so good to see you.
So great seeing you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this because I have a lot of questions. I think a lot of us do. But first, let's start with, what do you do at TELUS? Like, what is your job? That's a big title.
Yeah, that is a big title. And a confusing title. So what I'm responsible for is the networks that we build and run across Canada, as well as the IT systems that support not only the networks but also support our customers. So that's my job in a nutshell. That's what I do.
Okay, I know it's more detailed than that, but we're here to talk about 5G. And I feel like I've been hearing about 5G for a long time. Good things, bad things, confusing things. What is 5G?
Well, simply stated, 5G is the next major generation of wireless technology. And so we go through about every 10 years, we go through these changes. So people would have heard of, 1G, which would have been analog. Then we went to 2G, what was the first digital kind of connection. And that brought things like SMS, things that we're familiar with. And then we got 3G, which was really the start of wireless data in a big way. 4G, which is what we have right now. Many people have 4G LTE devices. That's much bigger data. And of course, 5G is the next generation. And as I said, they go in about 10-year cycle. So we're at the very beginning of the 5G cycle. And that's going to bring some, pretty, significant new changes to wireless. So I like to say that 5G is just not another G. It's actually a fundamental difference. And you actually have to look at the piece parts that make it up. So the way I like to describe 5G is not only in the form of speed, because that's what everybody kind of sees, right? I have a very good phone. It's connected. I can get some really kind of good things on it. I can watch video on it, whatever the case may be. So that is, of course, part of 5G. It'll be faster speeds, even bigger speeds that are available. But there's two other parts to it that need to be understood. One of them is IoT, Internet of Things, or as I prefer to call it, Internet of Everything. And I really truly mean that. Everything is going to be connected. It's kind of a bit of a funny story. One of the privileges I have in my job is I get to travel the world. Not so much this year, but certainly in previous years. And one of the Internet of Everythings I saw in Asia was actually a connected toothbrush. So you think, why would you want a connected toothbrush? But you had a connected toothbrush, and you can kind of start to imagine, well, when toothbrushes are connected, maybe I can create a little community of my kids with their friends, and I can see who's actually brushing their teeth better. So the Internet of Everything is actually coming. That's a big deal in 5G. And the third thing, and probably the one that's least understood, but I actually think one of the most important things, is it'll dramatically lower the latency, how long it takes to communicate from our cell phone or our device talking to the network and back, and it will compress the speed that it does that. Most of us don't think about latency because it doesn't really affect us. Sometimes you can see latency where you're watching a movie and you get a little stutter. That's usually because there's a latency somewhere in the network. But if you think about it in cases where it's really important, latency becomes an incredible underlying innovation that'll make things come to life. And I'll explain them as we get further in the conversation. So those three things really important about 5G: greater speed, of course, kind of, but we're already used to that. Internet of Everything, and I mean everything. And then the third thing is low latency, and that's the really important one.
Okay, so I need to slow down for a second here. So so I think my phone is pretty fast. I have 4G and I think it's fast and it's great. Are we talking about like the phone, or are we talking about everything? Because we seem to always talk about our phones, right? Like we have our phone, and 5G. It's not really a phone anymore, is it?
No, it's in fact, I call them supercomputers. What we've really done with these phones is we've taken what has been supercomputing technology and made it very personal, by being able to actually customize them. Like, you don't have to go very far back. Go 10 years back and start thinking about what your phone was.
Mm.
And now I can actually carry a phone that I've personalized to me, that actually has the apps I want, that has the services I want. It's completely unique to me. That's pretty incredible what we've created. So they're not phones anymore. They're supercomputers,
Yeah, they're
right?
definitely not phones. My first phone, I had a shoulder strap for it when I
Me too.
first started in media, right? It was this big, huge thing. And now it's this, you're right, it's a supercomputer. And I bet I'm not even using, I bet most of us aren't even using our supercomputers to their full capacity, right? We probably use just a small amount of them.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so what will 5G do for Canadians?
Well, so the first thing I would say is, I come back to those use case, the kind of like, what does it mean? Like faster speeds, Internet of Things, and low latency. And so that kind of makes you think about, well, what are the kinds of things that can happen? So first I'll start off at a very high level, which is, what is it going to do for our economy, right? So if we take a look at studies that have been done by very, very high-end consulting firms, like think of a company like Accenture. Accenture has actually come out and said that 5G will create 250,000 jobs for Canadians. If we take a look at the GSM Association, they're the association, the global association that actually drives the standard for these Gs. So they're the ones that develop the 5G standard. They will say that they anticipate that Canada's economy or 5G will contribute $150 billion to Canada's economy between 2020 and 2040. So first of all, it's actually going to shape our economy, right? That's an important thing. But then you look at, okay, well, what are the kinds of things they can do? And you kind of have to look at it maybe a little bit from businesses and then separately from consumers. So let me start from businesses first, right? So, the first thing you can think about in a business, and again, I'll pick on that low latency thing, and you'll see why it's important in a minute. In low latency, you may have actually seen that there are think about our Canada in our resource patch where we have mining equipment, and you may have even seen trucks that are driven autonomously. They're remote control trucks, but they can only go at a certain speed. And believe it or not, the speed that they go to is related to safety. Like I can't go too fast because if I go too fast, I may create some form of accident. And believe it or not, the speed that they go is related to latency. How fast can the network respond? Remember, these trucks are remote controlled. How fast can the network respond to my actions? I'm a remote operator. If I shorten the latency, I can now increase the speed of that truck. And if I increase the speed of that truck, by definition, I've improved productivity, right? So you can start to
Okay.
see how that latency, that very important term of latency, shrinking it down actually makes things happen faster, and making things happen faster increases productivity. So that's one example. You can take that very same example and bring it onto a factory floor, something that's call it an assembly or something being made. Coordinating the robots. If you've ever seen a robotic kind of assembly line, you'll see that the robots work kind of independently. If you can actually decrease the latency, they can now work dependently. I can actually have a robot handing something to another robot, and therefore increasing the productivity. So those things are really, really important. So you can see how at a high, at these really complex businesses, how that latency thing, really makes things happen faster, which increases speed of production and productivity. And this is an important thing because I like to think of, us as Canadians, how are we competitive on the world stage? And of course, one of the things we need to do is we need to continuously increase our productivity so that we stand toe to toe against the other G7 or G10 kind of countries out there. So that's an example around latency.
Okay. So what about the consumer, the average consumer like me? How does
Yeah.
this, work? What does it do for me?
Well, so let's talk about that latency thing again as an example. Now, the one thing I would say is this is not all immediate. I mean, if you take a look at any of the Gs, the
Mm,
4Gs rolled out over time. So you're not getting all these capabilities on day one. We're at the very beginning of the 5G journey. So these things will come over time. So whether it's IoT or low latency or the capabilities that bring, they're going to roll out over time. But let's think about a consumer. So one of the things that people often talk about with 5G is a virtual reality, right? And you
mm.
may have seen people with those glasses, kind of looking around,
Yeah.
um, and you've probably tried it, and you kind of get immersed into a world. But the reality is that's kind of all for fun, right? That's almost that's virtual reality, and it's for fun, and it's gaming and things of that nature. But if I think now about augmented reality, which is not so much the blocks I put in my head, but glasses that actually have an image projected on them, and it gives you information as you're looking at something. So
Wow.
the great way to think about that as an example, not consumer yet, but I'll get into some consumer examples of that. Think about when you're assembling something. You're a worker, you're in a factory, and you're assembling something. If I actually get a projection of what I'm supposed to do on my glasses, it removes error from my job. And well, you can think about maybe a automobile manufacturing plant when there's a car going down the line every 60 seconds. Well, that doesn't matter because I've kind of learned my job. I know how to do it. But then think of something else, like you're assembling an airplane. So I'm not actually doing the same job every 60 seconds. I'm doing the same job every 3 weeks. That's important now to actually know what you're doing, right? So if you have augmented reality, that actually helps you because it guides you through the steps. So now think about that from the concept of a consumer. So augmented reality may be very helpful when you get something complicated in your home. So think about buying a service from TELUS, and you need to kind of install a new router, right? And okay, I get a box with 10 plugs in it. What do I do with that? I can give you the verbal instructions, to make sure, plug in the green cable into the green port, plug in the yellow cable into this box. That works many, many times. And we as a company, of course, do that. But now just think if I actually had the ability to see what you were doing, right? So
Wow. Yeah.
I as the rep that's supporting you can now see what you're doing. And then the next step, as these, AR glasses become more available, you even take the rep out of the equation. You're actually now talking with, effectively a bot, like, something that's automatic, that's helping you through these things. So that's how it helps consumers, and that's around the latency.
Right.
That's an example of how AR or VR, virtual reality, becomes augmented reality, becomes actually helpful to me. We are very much entering what I would call the insight era. So if you kind of think about mobile phones, right? And you
Mhm.
don't have to think much long ago when you talk about, hey, my first mobile phone was actually installed in a car. Like I couldn't even take it with me.
Yeah, right? I forgot about those.
Right. Like, I had the little curly antenna on the back.
Yes.
And I remember being a young man being so cool with that. Um,
It
uh,
wasn't that long ago that we had those, it feels like, but I guess it was a lot longer than we think. We've come a long way for sure.
we have come a tremendously long way, right? So you go back, you go back then, and you fast forward to today. So when you go back then, or you go back to 3G, 3G, I would have called that the mobile economy. And in fact, if you talk to anybody in technology or anybody in consulting, they would have called it the mobile technology era. When we got to 4G, people started calling it the cloud era. And
Mm.
in fact, I really think that these devices that we use made cloud computing and the cloud companies, we made them successful because everybody's now hyper connected, right? Hyper connected. The next era beyond cloud is going to be the insight era. And that's where insights are much more important than data. So when you think about consumers and you think about the kinds of things that we can do, and so you've already seen, for example, in our wireless network, we have Babylon Health, which is,
Mhm.
if you actually need to see a doctor, you don't need to actually go and have a physical visit. You can connect directly to a doctor, and I can see the value of that, because in a lot of ways we're democratizing healthcare. We're making healthcare available to those that may not have been able to go out, or they're distant. There isn't a local doctor. The next step, though, is to take that information that's created and take insights out of it. So, many things, if I think about the IoT era, many things are going to be connected. So any of these devices that I use, whether they're, maybe a blood pressure monitor, maybe a glucose monitor, they're all going to be connected, and they're going to feed my private health record as I take those messages. So that when I go to a doctor, not only will the doctor be able to see all that data, but that data will actually be compared privately and anonymously to people that have the same condition I may have. So I may be diabetic. So my data will be compared to others, and that insight will actually help guide the doctor and the patient towards treatments that they may not have been aware of. So we're
Wow.
entering the insight era. That's what I think is the really important thing about 5G.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That when you put it like that, that insight, I get that. And when I really like that analogy used with health, right? That makes sense
Yeah,
to compare that. So I mean, it's obviously all smart, right? And so will we have smart cities? Like, will we,
100%.
how does this work when, for our cities and every town will be different, I guess.
Absolutely. So well, not only will we have smart cities, we'll have smart homes, right? And
Mm.
cute little story for me is, as you can imagine, my house is automated, right? Because that's the way Arrows thinks.
Yeah.
And so every once in a while, I'll be traveling, and Lisa, my wife, will say, I forget how to do something because it's rarely used, and I can actually turn it on remotely, right? So that's coming, and it's coming at scale. So it's going to come at a level where we all can do that, right? So of course, if
Right.
you participate in any of the businesses that TELUS have, so for example, if you take TELUS Security, that's actually at the front end of starting that home automation. So you can see it as a consumer how these things that are all connected will actually help. So whether it's turn on lights or turn down thermostat or do something, you can see how all this is connected. The same
Mm.
analogy is at the city level. Um, and so, as an example, one of the companies that we've partnered with is a company called MyoVision. And what MyoVision does is they actually put smart connected cameras at intersections. And being able to watch the traffic flow, they can actually now automate the lights. So where the lights, we've all traveled, right? So okay, we're not doing as much traveling these days or commuting these days, but you know how like frustrating it is when you get to a light and you say, "There's nobody here. Why is this light red? Why am I waiting for this light to change?" Right? Or when you get into a light it's very poorly run. You might have a light and then a block ahead you have another light and they seem to be uncoordinated.
Hmm.
MyoVision is going to fix that, right? Because MyoVision now is actually going to take a look at the traffic flow and reprogram those lights in real time to actually make the most efficient flow of traffic. So smart cities are really, really happening and they're really coming. And you can actually start seeing it already with some of our partners. And then you take that to the next step and you start to think about, okay, well, what about I need to jump on the bus? The bus has the exact same problem. How do I actually know when the bus is coming? Well, that's actually part of, you can build that into the same system. And then take it another step. And, as we think about where 5G is going, and then all our cars over time are going to be
Mm.
interconnected. And when our cars are interconnected, we'll be able to tell the cars what to do. Now, of course, the cars themselves, like if you see what's happening with Tesla, they already have a lot of independent kind of programming in them. The car will do it a lot on its own, but there's a need to actually share information. So, the example I love to use is, and maybe it's because winter is starting to happen here in Eastern Canada, and you start to look out and say, I see snowflakes. And of course, what happens to us is because things start to freeze, you start to get potholes, right?
Hmm.
Potholes is something that everybody experiences. If I can tell all the cars automatically that there's a pothole at this location and just move 6 inches over so you miss the pothole, that's a great win. That doesn't mean that every 100th of us have to actually have a flat tire or
Right.
a damaged wheel. None of us have to have it because the first car that encounters it tells the network there's a pothole here, and that instructs all the other cars move over a little bit. So those are the kinds of things you have to actually start to see in smart city and coming.
This is did you ever watch the Jetsons?
I did.
Yeah, this is, I mean, we're almost surpassing the Jetsons now. This is, I mean, this is wild to think
Yeah.
about. And again, just to take it back to what you said, this is not happening out of the gate. This is every decade we see growth like this, and this will be over a period of time. So obviously I want to talk to you about security, but before we do that, privacy, security, because that's what always comes up is privacy and security. But I mean, all about TELUS's philanthropic efforts, and here on the podcast we like to give back, and we always talk to our guests about what's close to their heart. And for you, I know it's the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. And so, on behalf of the TELUS Talks podcast, we will be giving the Duke of Edinburgh Awards $500. And I'm just curious as to why you chose that charity, why it's important to you.
Oh, that's a great question. And by the way, thank you. It's completely unnecessary, and wholeheartedly appreciate it. It's tremendous. Thank you very much. Um,
Oh, it's our pleasure. Tell me
well,
about
you're,
the awards, though. I don't know anything about them.
so the Duke, as we call it, the Duke of Edinburgh Award is an award that's given to youth. So as a young person, you start when you're in your teens, and you have to complete the Duke by the time you're in your early 20s. And there's three levels. There's as you can imagine, bronze, silver, and gold. And ultimately, what you need to do in the Duke is you actually have to do skill development. You have to have a physical activity. You have to have service, and you have to have adventure. So those are four components to the Duke. And of course, as you go through the levels, they get progressively harder to achieve, right? And the whole goal for me, the reason I like it, and by the way, both my kids went through it. They both are gold Duke achievers. The reason I like it is because it's kind of, in my opinion, it's building the next generation of citizen. It's helping you mind, body, and soul, right? Mind, body, and soul for the next generation of people. And of course, as a parent, and maybe it's because my kids are now in their early 20s, I think my job as a parent is to leave the world by having a replacement that's better than me, right?
Mm.
And this is so mind, body, soul. It's those four activities. You have to do it, and it's really quite good. Like I remember my kids having to do dog sledding. They went away for a week doing dog sledding. So it really takes you out of your comfort zone to achieve this
Mm.
award, and you start to see how you can connect the dots. And it's creating great citizens for me.
I
That's
like
what I like
it.
about it. Yeah,
Awesome. Well, there you go. We're going to give them $500 on your
that's great.
behalf. So, yeah,
Thank you.
no, we're happy to do that. So, let's talk about privacy and security because in the few times that I have heard about 5G, you always there's so with social media and with everything, there just seems to always be uh I don't want to say a conspiracy, but there's always sort of like some kind of negative talk, right? When about anything new, it seems. With 5G, I've tried to understand what it is that some people are concerned about, and I think it must be privacy that they're worried about. I mean, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great topic. This is another half-hour conversation, right? If you want to
Yeah.
talk about privacy. What I will say is, at our core, at our ethos, as TELUS, everything we do, every design starts with really three elements at its core: privacy, security, and reliability. We start every project with those three things at its ethos. And we stand by that. We want to make sure that we create secure networks, private networks, and ultimately, the biggest thing that we can do for Canadians, for our subscribers, is make sure that your device, your phone, whatever it may be you're using, is 100% whenever and wherever you need it. So we start with that. So it's designed, it's security, privacy by design. So that's the first thing I would say. Anything we design kind of starts that way. I think the privacy conversation is an interesting one because I think the core of perhaps the stress we have around privacy is around the services we use. So social media, as an example, is designed to actually collect information from you, and that information that's collected is called metadata, right? And that metadata is actually a kind of almost a blueprint of who you are. In fact, I would say that if you were able to see the metadata that's collected about you, that
Mm.
metadata is a better representation of you than you have of yourself. It's actually more likely representing you than your belief of who you are. So that's actually, to me, is the privacy issue. We kind of allow ourselves to connect to social media without perhaps knowing what we're doing. So all of us, including Eros, we sign up for things and we say, okay, okay,
Right.
okay, just give me the thing. Well, in
Right. So
those
if I
okays,
can I
okays,
just ask you, Arrows, like, so if I'm logging on to, or I'm putting in a new photo app, right? And it asks me for access to my photos, my email address, my access to, my contacts, all that sort of stuff. That information, that that's my privacy, and
yep,
I'm now allowing it.
yep.
This is what you mean by the metadata? Is this what you mean? So
So the
is that
metadata,
going to tell us, or is that going
no,
to aha?
no, it's going through TELUS to the service that you've created, right? So, or you've
Right.
signed into. So we're the carrier, if you will. We're actually building you almost need to think of us as building the highways that connect all the things. And one of the off ramps to the highways may be a social media provider. And in fact, I would even say we like to take responsibility and accountability for any of the off ramps you use. And you may have heard of TELUS having a program called TELUS Wise, as an example. And that's our way of actually, helping our clients and frankly our clients' kids learn about the things they should be concerned about, privacy and security on the internet. So we don't walk away from it. We don't say it's not us. We actually try to help teach. But that is the issue. I mean, we don't realize it, but many of these social media apps are literally collecting data from you every 10 minutes.
What about the health aspect of 5G? So, there's towers are going to be everywhere, and this is unhealthy for me.
Yeah. So the real interesting thing about that is that 5G fundamentally uses the same towers. And in fact, today's 5G uses the same frequencies that were used in 4G. So if there wasn't a health problem in 4G, why is there a health problem in 5G? So I think we live in a world where it's very easy to put up conspiracy theories, and those conspiracy theories take legs. I will tell you that in Canada and anywhere in the world, there are very, very tight standards for things like radio emission. And of course, professional companies like ours, we go out of our way to make sure that we abide by that standard. And that is done for 5G as it was done for 4G, 3G, et cetera. So we abide by all the health standards. And like I said, 5G is really not all that different than 4G. So I can't understand why the conspiracy theory came out now.
So as we wrap up, Eros, what do you want people in Canada to know about 5G, and what would be your takeaway for them?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because sometimes engineers get caught up in gobbledygook. We'll start explaining all these terrific kind of underlying nonsensical things that people just don't understand or really care about. So I like to make analogies or metaphors. And one of the things that I like to talk about 5G is I like to make a comparison of 5G to the rail system that was built in Canada at the end of the 1800s, right? And at the end of the 1800s, when we built that rail system really connected Canada. In fact, some argue that Canada wouldn't have become a nation without that coast-to-coast rail system built. So, and when if you were back then and you were thinking about that rail system and you were talking to an engineer about the rail system, they would have talked to you about the steam engines and the quality of the steel and all those bits and pieces that really. But if you kind of stand back and you see what happened with that rail system, it really united a country. It caused the movement of goods and services. It shortened distances. It allowed things like mail to travel. So it used to be that if I was on the East Coast and you needed to send a letter to the West Coast, it would take months, right? Whereas now it could happen in a week. It really was the advent of tremendous social change. And that's what I think 5G is. I like to look at it from the standpoint of what social change is going to come as a result of us building this generation's railroad. And this generation's railroad will do things like we've already talked about. It'll democratize healthcare. It'll help industry. It'll help us as individuals. You may have noticed, for example, that TELUS has started an ag tech company that we're going to get into agriculture. That's all about, how do we as Canadians, as TELUS, improve the food supply in the world? Because of course, that's a very big deal for our planet. How do we get, seeds to table so you can actually have food traceability? All those things are social outcomes that we don't think about. But that's what, if I can draw the analogy to the rail system, tremendous amount of social outcomes that we can see now when we're in the rearview mirror. Hard to see them on 5G, but that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to create social outcomes from it.
So exciting. I really appreciate you taking the time to explain this to us. I know that we probably could have talked for hours and hours about all of this, but it's a good snapshot into what is coming, and it's pretty exciting. And I really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through this, Eros.
This has been great fun. Thank you to you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.